Visit licensuraexams.com and try our samples completely free of charge.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dr. Linton Hutchinson, and with me, as always, is the incredible Eric Twachtman.
Why, thank you.
Today, we are tackling one of the most foundational and honestly most fascinating defense mechanisms in all of the psychodynamic theories: repression. Freud called it the cornerstone of psychoanalysis, and after today's episodes, you'll understand exactly why.
That's right, Linton. Repression is one of those concepts that shows up everywhere in trauma work, in attachment theory, in neuroscience, in everyday life. And yet it's deeply misunderstood, even by some clinicians. So today, we're going to break it all the way down and make it crystal clear. You ready?
I'm ready. Okay, Eric, let's start from the ground up. What exactly is repression and what makes it different from, let's say, just forgetting something, huh?
Well, I've forgotten. Oh, no, I haven't. That's such a great place to start because that distinction is everything. Repression is an unconscious, not subconscious, psychological process in which the mind actively, although without your awareness, pushes threatening, painful, or unacceptable thoughts, memories, feelings, or impulses out of conscious awareness and into the unconscious. The key word here is actively. It's not passive forgetting. The brain is doing the work to keep this material buried away from you.
Right, and that's exactly what separates it from suppression, which we'll cover later in an episode.
Oh, I can't wait.
Suppression is conscious. You know what you're pulling away from, and you're choosing to set it aside. Repression happens below the level of awareness. You don't know you're doing it. In fact, by definition, you can't know you're doing it in real time.
That's right. And Freud described it way back in the 1890s, and it remains one of the most studied and debated constructs in psychology. Because the basic idea is that the unconscious mind acts as a kind of psychological vault. Anything that would generate overwhelming anxiety, unacceptable desires, traumatic memories, intolerable emotions, anything that's going to overwhelm you, or your brain thinks will, gets locked away to protect the conscious self from being destabilized.
I get that. So let's talk about characteristics. The first and most defining characteristic is that repression is unconscious and automatic. There is no deliberate decision-making involved. The person has no awareness that the repression is occurring. They simply don't remember, or they don't feel what you would expect them to feel given what they've just experienced.
That's right. That emotional blunting is actually a really important clinical marker. When a client tells you about something that objectively sounds horrific, childhood abuse, a devastating loss, a trauma, and they do it with completely flat affect, no emotional resonance, that's worth paying close attention to. The emotion may be repressed along with the memory.
So that's an important for the first characteristics. Well, the second characteristic is that repressed material doesn't really disappear. It just goes underground. And here's where it gets clinically rich. What's repressed tends to find other ways of expressing itself through symptoms, through dreams, through body sensations, through relationship patterns. You'll see that quite a bit. Through unexplained anxiety or depression that the person can't trace to any identifiable cause.
Because they've repressed it. Right.
Right.
This is the psychodynamic principle that the unconscious always finds a way. Life finds a way.
It does.
Freud's term for this was the return of the repressed. I think I saw that movie. The material you buried is still there, still generating psychological pressure, still trying to surface. The symptom is essentially a compromise. The unconscious material peeking through in disguised form.
Okay, so that's what we probably see. So this is why you might have a client who presents with chronic, free-floating anxiety and swears up and down they had a perfectly fine childhood. nothing to report to you, but over time, as the therapeutic relationship deepens, and that's your job, memories and feelings begin to emerge that tells a totally different story.
That's right. And all of the perfect childhood looked like Leave It to Beaver, and it turns out there was, Eddie Haskell right there waiting.
Oh, that was my childhood.
There you go. The third characteristic is that repression is motivated. Unlike ordinary forgetting, which is random and passive, repression targets specific content, material that is anxiety producing, threatening to the self concept, or connected to overwhelming experiences. The unconscious is specifically and selective burying things that feel most dangerous.
Okay, let me ask once again. Repression is people are doing it with awareness or without awareness?
Without awareness, happening on the automatic level.
Okay, so they have no clue. All right, fourth, repression exists on a spectrum of depth. Some repressed material is relatively close to the surface and can be accessed fairly quickly in therapy with the right conditions, which are safety, rapport, and a reflective space for the client. Other material is deeply, deeply buried and may take years to approach. So if you have someone that has insurance, you're never going to get to that. Or it may emerge indirectly through body-based symptoms rather than explicit memory.
That brings us to the fifth characteristic, the somatic dimension.
Ah,
Research in trauma and neuroscience has increasingly confirmed what clinicians have long observed. Repressed emotional material is often stored in the body.
yeah.
Clients may experience unexplained physical symptoms, chronic pain, gastrointestinal issues, tension, fatigue, headaches. Bessel van der Kolk's work in particular has illuminated how trauma and repressed experience live in the body when the mind refuses to hold on to them.
That reminds me of something happened to me.
Yeah,
Have you ever heard of rolfing?
I have, and it sounds violent, and I never wanted to do it.
I didn't either, but I was afforded the opportunity to do it for
Oh, there
free.
you go.
So I thought, what the heck?
Yeah,
It
how
was
bad
the
can it be?
60s. Everything was sort of free floating at that point. So I started doing rolfing. And it's really intense. And they were working on the back of my head. And all of a sudden, after he worked and pressed really, really hard, this memory just popped to my head where I was up with my grandfather at his manse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I was
Because he was a
swinging.
pastor.
Yeah, he was pastor. And I was swinging on a bar and flipped over and smashed my head right on the cement.
Really?
And I had no memory of that at all, and until I got Rolf. So it was
Wow.
one of those memories that I had totally repressed.
And there it was, and it came back through the
Rolfing.
violent massage.
You might want to consider doing that too.
Or I'll let you talk about it, and I'll live vicariously through you.
Well, I'll tell you, the worst part was when they did it up through your navel cavity.
Boy, you're making it just sound irresistible.
Okay.
I can't wait.
Rolfing, look it up, guys. The sixth characteristics is that repression is inherently self-protective. And the moment it is established, often in childhood, just like I said, or during acute trauma, it is adaptive. The mind is saying, this is way too much. I can't process this right now or function at the same time. So that's the basic survival mechanism. The clinical problem arises when repression becomes chronic and rigid, preventing integration and growth.
Right. Once it gets in your way of your idealized childhood, now you have to put in the fact that you may have been abused as a child. That your mind rebels against it. Right.
Yeah.
So the seventh characteristic, which is crucial for therapeutic work, is that repressed material tends to be affectively charged, just like we talked about, the flat affect there. When it surfaces, whether through a memory, a dream, a somatic experience, like Rolfing, or a therapeutic interaction, it often carries enormous emotional weight. Clients may be surprised by the intensity of what they feel when previously repressed content begins to emerge.
Really, that happened to me. It was exactly like that. So you as a therapist need to create safety in the therapeutic relationship And that's basically non-negotiable when doing this kind of work with clients.
So let's talk about where we see repression showing up most prominently across diagnostic presentations.
Okay.
Because while repression is a universal defense mechanism, everyone uses it to some degree, it's especially pervasive in certain personality structures.
Now, these are the kind of clients that you get that you wish you had never got. Let's talk and start with histrionic personality disorder, or HPD. This, of course, is really fascinating because on the surface, people with HPD appear to be intensely emotional. They seem that way, dramatic, expressive, and reactive. But if you look more closely, the emotional displays are often surface level performances
Right, yes.
rather than genuine deep processing of feeling. What's often repressed in HPD is authentic vulnerability, genuine need, and any emotional experience that would require sitting with discomfort rather than dramatizing it.
Which takes away from the reality of the feeling because you're making such a big show of the play, the drama.
So
Right.
that becomes what's going on as opposed to dealing with the underlying emotional
Right.
content.
So the drama itself is a defense against the deeper emotion.
That
The
makes sense.
theatrical display keeps the person and others focused on the surface, where you can control it, while the real, more threatening material stays buried. It's repression wearing a sequined costume on stage, if you will.
I wonder if we know anyone that's like that.
Oh, well, I don't.
Okay. Well, I love that image, and I'm going to use that in my next therapy session.
Oh, there you go, because all the world's a stage.
Okay.
See, I had to throw Shakespeare.
Yeah, I know.
Well, you're welcome.
Okay.
Next is OCPD, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, not to be confused with OCD, because people with OCPD often repress strong emotions, particularly anger, vulnerability, and dependency needs. Their intense focus on order, control, rules, and productivity serve as a way to keep emotional life managed and contained. The emotional content's there. It's just buried under relentless rules and structures and guideposts so that they don't have to deal with it. They've set up all the rules so they don't have to fiddle.
Okay, and that's when their whole structure starts to fail. When something disrupts the rigid routines or they're confronted with something that they just totally can't control. You sometimes see surprise emotional eruption that captures and catches you and them off guard. That's repressed material breaking through when the lid comes loose.
Right, that when the smallest thing makes them weep like a baby and they don't know why, there's the crack.
Yeah.
Well, and then there's also borderline personality disorder, and that's another place where we see repression, particularly around the repression of attachment needs in individuals who developed in environments where attachment was frightening or inconsistent. The intense emotional reactivity in BPD can sometimes mask an underlying repression of the core belief, that is, I am fundamentally unlovable, which is too threatening to hold consciously.
Okay. It seems like all those personality disorders have a coping mechanism.
Right. Yes, you're right. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, even paranoid personality disorder also warrants mention here. The projection that's so central to paranoid presentation is often built on the foundation of repression. The individual represses their own unacceptable impulses, hostility, aggression, and shame, and then projects those outward onto others. In fact, we're doing a whole session on defense mechanisms, so maybe we'll get into that. So you can't project what you consciously acknowledge. Repression makes the projection possible.
And actually gives it reason to exist. Right.
Yeah.
And of course, repression is central to presentations that involve significant trauma history, including complex PTSD and dissociative disorders, though those involve more elaborate defense structures on top of the repression. In PTSD, the repression of traumatic memories is one of the core mechanisms driving the disorder, even as fragments of those memories break through in flashbacks, nightmares, and intrusive symptoms.
Okay, so let's go through the key takeaways and let's look at basically what we've gone through with the episode today.
Alrighty, first, repression is unconscious and automatic.
Okay.
Your client is not choosing to withhold. They genuinely don't have access to the material yet.
Okay.
That's your job.
That's your job. So secondly, repressed material doesn't disappear. It finds expression through symptoms, somatic complaints, relationship patterns, and that's usually why they come to see you, and behavior. So just like following the money, here you need to follow the symptoms.
Exactly. Third, emotional flatness is the face of distressing content, and that's a clinical signal.
Right.
If the expected emotion isn't there, it's your job to ask where it went.
Okay, fourth, and a lot of times this won't show up to you because we'll go to a physician for this, but the body often holds what the mind has repressed. Somatic awareness work, body-based interventions, somatic experiencing, trauma-informed approaches can be your way of getting something that they can't quite reach.
And fifth, repression served a purpose. It protects your client when protection was necessary. Honor the intelligence of that defense, because obviously the person's fragile or they would be able to let it go, and they can't. So even as you gently help your client build the capacity to experience it and finally live without the repression.
Well, thank you very much for everyone being with us today.
Appreciate it.
And keep studying, do a little bit every day, and remember, it's in there.